The Echo of a Half-Century Wait. Chapter 1. The Unexpected Arrival. March 2025. The Charleston breeze, heavy with the scent of magnolias and salt, drifted lazily across the wide, sun-dappled porch of my ancestral home. I am Evelyn Ramsey, though in my youth, everyone called me Evie. 70 years old, a widow for 3 years now, I sat in my rocking chair, watching the shadows lengthen across the manicured lawn. My life, by all outward appearances, was a tapestry woven with the threads of Southern grace and impeccable propriety. A loving, albeit conservative husband, Richard, now gone. 2 successful, well-adjusted children. A prominent social standing. To the world, my life was a perfect, finished masterpiece. But often, in the quiet solitude of these later years, a faint, persistent whisper would emerge from the deep recesses of my heart. A whisper of something missing. A profound, ineffable regret. A sense that somewhere along the winding path of my existence, I had taken a wrong turn. A road not taken, a life not lived. I smoothed the delicate lace of my shawl, my gaze fixed on the wrought iron gates that guarded our long, winding driveway. The afternoon was settling into a predictable, gentle rhythm. Just like my life. Predictable. Safe. Always. Then, a sudden, jarring break in the pattern. An engine rumble, a vehicle, old and distinctly out of place, rattled its way up the drive. Not a sleek sedan or a polished SUV, but a faded, beat-up panel van, adorned with hand-painted wildflowers and peeling stickers from distant national parks. It coughed, sputtered, and finally groaned to a halt directly in front of my porch. My brow furrowed. Who could this be? No one I knew drove such a ramshackle vehicle, and certainly not to my meticulously kept home. The driver's side door creaked open, and a man emerged. Tall, gaunt, his long, silver-gray hair, pulled back in a loose ponytail, fell over the collar of a faded denim shirt. Deep lines fanned out from the corners of his eyes, etched by years of sun and laughter, and I suspected, hardship. He moved with a languid grace, yet there was a weariness in his shoulders. He was an old man, like me. But then he looked up, and his eyes, blue, incandescent, and in them, an unmistakable spark. A wild, untamed fire that time, it seemed, had failed to extinguish. My breath caught in my throat. My heart, which had been beating in a sedate, elderly rhythm, suddenly hammered against my ribs, a frantic, forgotten drumbeat. It couldn't be. He took a slow step towards the porch, his gaze never leaving mine. A faint, almost mischievous smile touched his lips, a ghost of a grin from a lifetime ago. And his voice, raspy with the passage of years, yet utterly, devastatingly familiar, broke the profound silence of the afternoon. I'm still waiting, Evie. Patrick O'Connell. The name screamed in my mind, a seismic tremor that shook the very foundations of my carefully constructed world. Patrick, my first love, my only true love, the wild, passionate artist, the free spirit I had left behind 5 decades ago for the safety, the predictability, the utter certainty of Richard. The man who had vanished from my life without a trace, a phantom limb of my youth, long since resigned to the realm of wistful memory. He was here, standing on my driveway, looking at me with those same piercing blue eyes, saying those words, I'm still waiting. 50 years, half a century, my entire adult life had unfolded in the comfortable, predictable embrace of Richard's world, while the ghost of Patrick O'Connell remained locked away in the deepest chambers of my heart, a bittersweet ache I had long since learned to ignore. Now, that ghost had materialized, and in his weathered hand, he held not a promise, but a mirror, reflecting back the Evie I once was, the Evie I had abandoned. The shock was profound, the fear paralyzing, and the rush of long-suppressed emotions, a dizzying, terrifying tsunami. Chapter 2: The Unraveling Thread. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the distant calls of gulls and the thrum of my own frantic heartbeat. Patrick stood there, a living ghost from a life I had systematically erased. His words, "I'm still waiting, Evie," hung in the air, the profound accusation and an impossible promise. "Patrick," I finally managed, my voice a frail whisper, barely audible even to myself. Is that really you?" He nodded, that familiar, lopsided grin softening the lines of his aged face. "Last time I checked, though I wouldn't blame you for doubting it. It's been a few lifetimes, hasn't it, Evie?" A few lifetimes indeed. The world, my world, felt suddenly precarious. I rose from my rocking chair, my knees trembling. "Come in," I managed, gesturing vaguely towards the door. "Please, come in." He followed me into the cool, shadowed elegance of the house. The antique furniture, the polished silver, the muted colors, all hallmarks of the Ramsay legacy, all things that would have felt utterly alien to the young, restless Patrick I remembered. He ran a hand over the smooth wood of an antique console table, a faint, almost wistful smile on his lips. "Still the same, Evie, still a palace." We sat in the drawing room, a formal space I rarely used, the heavy curtains drawn against the afternoon sun. I offered him tea. He chuckled, a rough, familiar sound. "Still the proper Southern lady, I see. Always tea. I always preferred coffee, black and strong, remember?" The small detail, so insignificant, hit me with a jolt. He remembered everything. "Why are you here, Patrick?" I asked, my voice finally finding some strength, though it still trembled. "After all this time?" He leaned forward, his blue eyes, still as captivating as ever, holding mine. "I never stopped coming back, Evie. Every few years. Just to see, to hope, to see if you'd changed your mind, if you were still here." He gestured around the elegant room. "Looks like you made your bed, then." His bluntness, so typical of him, stung, but it was also honest. "I made a choice, Patrick," I said defensively. "A practical choice, the right choice." He merely shrugged, a world of unspoken understanding in the gesture. "Right for who, Evie? Right for your family? For your society? Or right for you?" The question hung heavy in the air, a cruel echo of my deepest unspoken regret. He began to speak of his life, a nomadic existence, traveling the world, living out at his van, painting landscapes, selling his art in small galleries and street fairs. Years of passionate struggle, of poverty and exhilaration, of artistic breakthroughs and agonizing self-doubt. He spoke of lost loves, of friendships forged on dusty roads, of sun-drenched days and star-filled nights under open skies. A life utterly devoid of the predictability and security I had chosen. A life that, despite its hardships, sounded breathtakingly rich, bursting with experience. As he spoke, memories flooded my mind, a torrent of suppressed images and feelings. Patrick and I, young and reckless, exploring the hidden nooks of Charleston, dreaming of escaping its genteel confines. Our college years in Florida, away from my family's watchful eyes. Days spent on the beach, sketching in our shared notebook. concocting elaborate plans for a life of art and adventure. My dreams of becoming a travel writer, documenting his paintings, our journeys, his dream of building a small, unconventional house by the sea, a place where creativity flowed as freely as the ocean air, a dream we had built together, brick by imagined brick. Then the inevitable clash. My family, the prominent Charleston Ramseys, Richard, the epitome of Southern gentility and financial stability, a match made in social heaven. My parents had been horrified by Patrick. He's unstable, Evie. A vagabond. An artist won't give you security. He's not suitable. The pressure had been relentless, a suffocating blanket of expectation. I remembered the agonizing moment of decision. The tearful arguments with Patrick. His desperate pleas for me to choose him, to choose our shared dream. We can make it work, Evie. We can live on love and art. My fear, my terror of disappointing my family, of stepping outside the rigid boundaries of my social world. The promise of stability, of a predictable, comfortable future had seemed so alluring, so safe, and I had chosen it. I had chosen Richard. I had chosen the gilded cage, and I had broken Patrick's heart and my own. He reached into the worn canvas bag he carried and pulled out a battered, leather-bound notebook. My heart leaped. It was the one we had shared, our dream book. He opened it, flipping through the faded pages, his sketches vibrant and free, mingled with my youthful scribbles, ideas for our travels, our ocean house, our future. He pointed to a drawing of a small, eccentric cottage, perched precariously on a cliff overlooking a stormy sea. Remember this? Our Maine house. We designed it together, right down to the crooked windows and the artist's studio overlooking the water. My throat tightened. He had kept it. All these years, he had never abandoned our dream. The knowledge was a crushing weight of guilt and a profound ache of what might have been. I had discarded my dream, buried it beneath layers of social expectation and comfortable living. He had kept it alive. As we spoke, my daughter, Lizzie, arrived. Lizzie, 45, a successful corporate lawyer in Atlanta. Practical, logical, so much like her father. She entered the drawing room, her eyes widening at the sight of Patrick, a stranger in our impeccably ordered home. Her presence, a living embodiment of the life I had chosen, highlighted the stark contrast between the two men. Lizzie, wary and suspicious, would never understand the raw, terrifying beauty of the choice I had once made and the profound regret that had followed. The threads of my carefully constructed life were unraveling, piece by agonizing piece, and I knew with a chilling certainty that this unexpected arrival had plunged me into a reckoning I had avoided for half a century. Chapter 3. The Weight of the Unlived Life. Lizzie's gaze, sharp and analytical, swept over Patrick, then settled on me, a question mark etched on her perfectly composed face. Mother? Who is this? Her voice was cool, bordering on wary. Lizzie, this is Patrick O'Connell, I introduced, my voice betraying a tremor I couldn't control. An old friend from my youth. The word friend felt hollow, utterly inadequate. Lizzie offered a polite, strained smile. Patrick merely nodded, his eyes observing her with an almost unnerving perceptiveness. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken questions. Lizzie, ever protective, remained by my side, her presence a subtle barrier between Patrick and me. After a few stilted minutes, Patrick, sensing the unspoken tension, gracefully excused himself. I should go, Evie. I'll call you later, if you want. I walked him to the door, Lizzie hovering discreetly behind me. As he reached his van, he paused, turning back. "The offer still stands, Evie," he said, his blue eyes holding mine. "The house by the sea. I'm building it. In Maine. Just like we dreamed." Then, with a faint, sad smile, he climbed into his dusty van and rumbled away, leaving a silence far heavier than any sound. Lizzie immediately turned to me, her composure cracking. "Mother, who was that man? He looks like he's been living in a ditch. And what was he talking about? A house in Maine? What offer?" Her voice was laced with a mixture of concern and thinly veiled disapproval. I tried to explain. He was my first love, Lizzie, before your father. We had dreams, different dreams. Lizzie scoffed, her voice tight with disbelief. "Mother, you're 70 years old. And you're talking about a man from half a century ago? This is absurd. You're a Ramsay. You have a beautiful home, a wonderful family, a perfect life. Don't tell me you're getting sentimental over some vagabond artist." Her words were blunt, echoing the very sentiments my own parents had expressed all those years ago. The echoes were deafening. Her reaction, though predictable, crushed me. She saw only the surface, the carefully constructed facade of my life. She couldn't comprehend the depth of my unspoken yearning, the quiet desperation that had festered beneath the veneer of stability. It highlighted the chasm between us, a chasm I had inadvertently created by choosing a life she understood, but I didn't truly embody. Later that week, desperate for someone who might understand, I called Margaret, my best friend since childhood. She lived across town, her life equally rooted in Charleston tradition. Margaret, bless her, always possessed an earthy wisdom, a keen eye for the unspoken truth. "Margaret," I began, my voice trembling, "you won't believe who showed up at my door. Patrick O'Connell." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then, a low gasp. "Patrick? Oh, Evie, good heavens. After all this time, I always wondered what happened to him." "You know," her voice softened, "I always thought you two were meant to be. You were so different with him, so alive." Her words, so simple, yet so profound, hit me like a revelation. So alive. Had I been truly alive since I chose Richard? I had been comfortable, content perhaps, but truly alive? "Everyone knew, Evie," Margaret continued, her voice tinged with a familiar sadness. "Everyone knew how much you loved him and how much you changed after you chose Richard. You became quieter, more proper. You lost that sparkle in your eyes." Her honesty was a painful mirror. She saw it. Everyone saw it. Sparkle I had sacrificed for security. The wild, free spirit I had traded for a gilded cage. The confirmation of my deepest fear was devastating. I hadn't fooled anyone. Not really. I had just fooled myself. The days that followed Patrick's arrival were a maelstrom of memories and agonizing introspection. My dreams were haunted by images of a younger Patrick, his laughter ringing in my ears, his hand reaching for mine. The elegant rooms of my house, once comforting, now felt suffocating. Every antique, every polished surface screamed of a life that wasn't authentically mine. I found myself revisiting old photographs, albums tucked away in dusty boxes. Pictures of a vibrant, rebellious Evie, her arms slung around a long-haired Patrick, their faces alight with shared dreams. And then, the gradual transformation. A more subdued Evie, standing beside a solid, unsmiling Richard, her smile polite, but her eyes holding a faint, unreadable sadness. The visual evidence of the life I had chosen and the life I had abandoned was stark, undeniable. I pulled out my old journals from that era. Not the proper demure ones I kept later, but the raw, honest ones from my youth. They were filled with desperate laments, agonized questions, and the crushing weight of my family's expectations. Page after page, a young girl's heart tore itself apart, torn between societal duty and a passionate, unconventional love. Her struggle, her ultimate capitulation. The words were a testament to the sacrifice I had made, a sacrifice that I now realized had cost me a piece of my soul. The ghost of the unlived life, once a faint whisper, had become a haunting, relentless presence. And Patrick O'Connell, the man who was still waiting, was the living embodiment of that ghost, daring me to finally confront the woman I had become and the woman I had left behind. The crossroads, I knew, had arrived. And this time, I had to choose. Not for my family, not for society, but for Evie, the real Evie, the one who still longed for the scent of salt air and the boundless horizon of an open sea. Chapter 4. The Path Not Taken, Revisited. The Offer. Patrick's words echoed in my mind, a siren's song from a distant shore. The offer still stands, Evie. The house by the sea. I'm building it, in Maine, just like we dreamed. He was literally building our shared dream, waiting for me. The audacity, the hope, the terrifying possibility. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, the familiar, safe ground behind me, and an unknown, exhilarating abyss before me. My life with Richard had been a comfortable, predictable journey on a well-paved highway. Patrick was offering a wild, unmapped path through dense forests and stormy seas. And I, at 70, was being asked to choose again. The internal battle was fierce. Decades of ingrained habits, of societal expectations, of the comfort of routine, screamed at me to stay, to dismiss Patrick as a fleeting, romantic folly, to remain the elegant, respected widow in my Charleston mansion. But the yearning for something more, for something authentic, for the vibrant life I had glimpsed in Chloe's eyes and heard in Patrick's voice, was a primal roar that drowned out the voices of caution. One rainy afternoon, a week after Patrick's visit, I found myself driving to the quiet, dignified cemetery where Richard rested. His headstone, a gleaming slab of polished granite, stood as a testament to his solid, unwavering presence. I sat on the damp grass, the rain a gentle patter around me. "Richard," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion, "I need to talk to you." I traced the engraved letters of his name. "You were a good man, a kind man. You gave me stability, security. You loved me in your way. And I loved you for your steadfastness, for the life we built." Tears streamed down my face, hot and salty, mingling with the cool raindrops. But it wasn't the whole of me, Richard, not all of me. And I know now I haven't been truly happy, not in the way I dreamed of when I was young. I married you because it was the right thing to do, because my family pushed, because I was scared. I swallowed hard, the words tasting bitter. I'm sorry, Richard. Sorry for the part of me that was always missing, the part that always longed for something else. I truly tried to be the wife you deserved, but a piece of my heart always belonged to a different dream, to a different life, with a different man. I spoke of Patrick, of the dream house, of the artist's life. I confessed my regrets, my unfulfilled desires. It was a raw, honest conversation with a ghost, a plea for understanding, a final act of closure. I need to find my own peace, Richard. I concluded, my voice firmer now. And I think this is the only way. It wasn't about disrespecting him or erasing our life together. It was about acknowledging the truth of my own heart. Finally, I left the cemetery feeling a profound, if melancholic, sense of liberation. The invisible chains that bound me to a past I had outgrown were slowly, irrevocably loosening. The next day, I called Dr. Ben Carter, our longtime family physician. A wise, gentle man in his late 70s, he had known me since childhood, a silent observer of my entire life. I trusted him implicitly. I sat in his familiar office, the scent of antiseptic and old paper comforting. "Ben," I began, looking him directly in the eye, "I need your honest opinion about something very personal." I told him about Patrick's return, about the journal, about the realization that I had lived a life of quiet regret. I confessed my desire to leave Charleston, to go to Maine, to finally chase the dreams I had abandoned. He listened, his kind eyes never leaving mine. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Evie," he said, his voice soft, "I've seen many lives lived, many choices made, and I've seen the cost of regret. You know, after Richard died, I watched you. You moved through the motions. You were gracious, dignified, as always. But the light, the sparkle I remembered from your younger days, it wasn't there." He took off his glasses, polishing them slowly. "You always had such a vibrant spirit, Evie, so full of life, so creative. I remember you and Patrick running around town, always sketching, always dreaming. Everyone saw it, you know? Everyone saw how happy you were with him, how much you shone." My eyes welled up. He saw it. He had always seen it. "I'm not saying it's easy," he continued. "It's a big step, a huge change at your age. But if you don't take it, Evie, if you don't take this chance, what will be left? More regret? More of that quiet emptiness?" He leaned forward, his gaze firm. "Evie, you deserve to be happy. Truly, deeply happy. If this man, if this dream is what will make you whole again, then you must go, before it's too late. Before the still waiting turns into too late." His words, from a man who knew me, who understood the quiet sacrifices I had made, were the final piece of the puzzle. The practical voice, the voice of reason, finally aligned with the voice of my heart. The fear was still there, a tangible thing in my stomach, but it was now overshadowed by a profound sense of urgency, of liberation. I knew my decision, and this time it would be my own. My next conversation would be the hardest. It would be with Lizzie, and I would tell her everything. The choice, after half a century, was finally clear. The road less traveled was calling, and Evie, the real Evie, was ready to answer. Chapter 5: The Road Less Traveled. The conversation with Lizzie was perhaps the hardest I had ever faced. She arrived at the house, her lawyer's briefcase clutched in her hand, her expression one of polite concern, mixed with barely concealed exasperation. She expected another sentimental discussion about Patrick, another attempt to dismiss my feelings as late-life romanticism. I sat her down in the drawing room, the same room where I had introduced her to Patrick. My voice was calm, steady, filled with a resolve she had rarely, if ever, seen in me. "Lizzie," I began, "I have made a decision, a very important one. I'm going to sell the house." Her eyes widened in shock. "Mother, what are you talking about? This is our home, our family legacy." "It's a house, Lizzie," I said, my gaze unwavering. "A beautiful house, yes. but it's also a monument to a life I chose but didn't entirely live. I'm going to Maine with Patrick. A stunned silence fell. Lizzie stared at me, her mouth slightly agape. Then, her logical, analytical mind kicked in. Mother, this is irresponsible. You're 70 years old. You're giving up your stability, your community, your life for some romantic fantasy with a man you haven't seen in 50 years? What about your financial security? What about us, your grandchildren? I let her speak, letting the torrent of her fears and disapproval wash over me. When she finally paused, breathless, I spoke again, my voice soft but firm. Lizzie, I have lived my entire life trying to be responsible, trying to do what was expected, what was right. I married your father, a good, kind man, and I dedicated myself to our family. I don't regret my children or the love we shared as a family, but I have lived with a profound, quiet regret about the choices I made for myself, about the life I longed for, the dreams I abandoned. I pulled out the old English journal, the Mrs. Davis letters, and even the dream book with Patrick's sketches. I laid them out on the polished coffee table. This is who I was, Lizzie. This is what I gave up. For 50 years, I stifled a part of myself that desperately wanted to create, to wander, to live a life less structured, more vibrant. And now, I looked her squarely in the eye. Patrick is offering me a chance to reclaim that. He's building the house by the sea, the one we dreamed of. He's literally still waiting for me to join him in that dream. I paused, letting the words sink in. I am not doing this to hurt you or to abandon you. I am doing this because for the first time in a very long time, I am choosing myself. I am choosing to live the remainder of my life authentically. And if I don't take this chance now, I will die with the deepest, most agonizing regret of all. Lizzie, typically so composed, began to cry. Not tears of anger, but of a dawning understanding. She picked up the old journal, reading a few lines of my youthful poetry. Looking at Patrick's vivid sketches, she saw the longing, the passion, the dreams that had been buried. And perhaps, for the first time, she saw the true depth of her mother's unhappiness, hidden beneath layers of elegance and social grace. Mother, she finally choked out, her voice raw. I just want you to be happy, truly happy. If this is what you need, if this is where you find your peace, then go. Go. Her words, once so dismissive, were now filled with a genuine, if still tearful, acceptance. It was not easy for her, I knew. But it was love. A different kind of love, perhaps, but a profound validation nonetheless. The house sold quickly. I kept only what truly mattered. The old journals, Mrs. Davis's letters, a few cherished photos, a worn blanket Richard had loved, and my favorite rocking chair. The rest, the antique furniture, the formal silver, the Ramsay legacy, I left for Lizzie and her brother. I was shedding the weight of a lifetime, preparing for a new, lighter existence. A week later, Patrick's familiar, dusty van pulled up the driveway one last time. I stood on the porch, my few belongings packed neatly inside. No formal farewells, no society page announcements, just the quiet, bracing anticipation of a new beginning. I looked at my beloved Charleston home, the porch where I had spent so many quiet, reflective hours, a silent farewell to the past. I climbed into the passenger seat of Patrick's van. It smelled faintly of oil paint, salt, and adventure. He smiled, that same wild, incandescent light in his blue eyes. Ready, Evie? Ready, Patrick, I replied, a profound sense of peace settling over me. more than ready. The drive north, up the long coastline to Maine, was a journey of revelation. We talked for hours, filling in the half-century gap. He spoke of his artistic struggles, his travels, his simple existence, his unwavering belief in the dream of our ocean house. I spoke of my life with Richard, the joys of motherhood, the quiet sadness, the yearning for something more. We were two old souls, weathered by life, marked by joy and loss, but finally, irrevocably, together. The land in Maine was rugged, windswept, and breathtakingly beautiful. A small, rocky cove with the wild Atlantic crashing against the shore. And there, slowly taking shape, was the beginning of our house. Not a grand mansion like the one I had left, but a modest, eccentric cottage perched just as we had sketched it in our dream book. We worked together, slowly, deliberately. Patrick, with his artist's vision and calloused hands, directing the construction. Me, painting the walls with colors inspired by the sea and sky. Designing the crooked windows, carving a space for my own writing desk, overlooking the tumultuous ocean. It was hard work, physical and emotional, but every nail hammered, every brushstroke applied, felt like a reclamation. I started to write again. Not financial reports, but stories. Stories of lives lived, of second chances, of the enduring power of love and dreams. Patrick painted, his canvases alive with the light and fury of the Maine coast. We were old, yes. Our bodies were tired, but our spirits, finally reunited, were vibrant, alive, and utterly free. Lizzie and my son visited, initially hesitant, then gradually seeing the genuine joy radiating from me. They began to understand. They saw the sparkle in my eyes, the true happiness that had been absent for so long. They saw me not as the dignified Charleston matriarch, but as Evie, the artist, the writer, the woman finally living her truth. I often sat on the porch of our small, beloved ocean house, the roar of the waves a constant lullaby, a pen in my hand, writing the unwritten chapters of my life. I knew now that true success wasn't measured by status or wealth, but by the quiet satisfaction of living authentically. I had chosen the wrong path once, yes, but after 50 years, the other path, the one less traveled, had found me again. And I, at 70, had finally found my way home. Patrick, my wild, unchanging love, sat beside me, sketching the ever-changing sea. We were two old souls, finally where we were meant to be. And in his eyes, I still saw the question, and in mine, I finally had the answer. I had chosen, and this time, I had chosen right.